the two Harry Seldons. And the thing I wanted to mention about this one is that it has a very abrupt end for Harry Seldon, just as it likely would have been. But there's a twist to that too, that at least he's free from the mule. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about that chapter. And it starts with him reading all this shit just because he knows that he'll be tested by the mule on it. And it seems to like his life is worse than even his death.
Yeah, well, but we don't know. The person who kills him is likely Big Frank or one of the Maravelli people. Because if you remember, this comes after the Woody Allen scene in the restaurant, and in the Woody Allen scene, Harry Seldon is mocking Paulie, and Paulie, we find out after Harry Seldon has left, Paulie has people follow him, and that's how he finds out about the foundation and stuff. So it's likely that Big Frank or one of Big Frank's hit squads has taken out Harry Seldon. It was midway through his next inhalation that BAM! And we know from early in the book that when we see a big, bold BAM in larger font with an exclamation point, that's a gunshot. So that sort of and a similar thing happens to the black fellow whose name I forget, who's like the number 2 or number 3 guy in the Foundation. So yeah, and you know, there's a whole digression. There's another guy who again whose name also in the Foundation ends up dying. He's the guy who kills someone at the insane asylum because he's fucking one of the Patriarcha family's daughter or something. So there's lots of these things, and so in this throughout this second book, in the first book of Paul, we have the coming of the Foundation. We sort of know the threat is coming. In the first half of the Mule, we see that the Foundation has in some ways displaced the mob as the top criminal organization, at least in the Northeast. And then we see that somehow Paulie and Big Frank are, even though they have the smaller family, they're more effective in dealing with the Foundation. And they slowly start knocking off all these people until the last one to be knocked off, or seemingly eliminated in some way, is possibly the Mule, who may or may not be the patient in the mental ward that ends up in what I call Corridor Gray.
Yeah, we'll talk about that chapter too. I wanted to mention too, the way that you describe this, it's almost as if it's a contrivance that they would ever be able to stop the Foundation. Even if you would grant that, which I wouldn't, I think that it plays out very realistically. I think that works within the whole metafictional universe of Norwegian and the Family. And I've mentioned this several times to others, that bad writing, or seemingly bad writing within a different context, can really make gold in certain things. So even though it could be seemingly a contrivance, it works within this context.
Well, yeah, all of this anarchist shit. Like I said, I could have written, I could have made the Mule specific. I could have had him be more like a real Howard Hughes. I could have made Howard Hughes the Mule in this fictive universe, and I could have had quotes from the Brown book made up. But two things, other than time and the fact, like I said, that I wanted the interviews accordion this thing. I didn't want to write a 4 million or 5 million word book, and by using snippets from some of these anarchist or syndicalist tracks from the 1880s or whatnot, it shows that this Mule is living in the past in a certain sense. The time has already passed him by. He's a would-be Stalin or a would-be Lenin or a would-be Hitler in a different age in a different country.
At the same time, it's not necessarily just him; it's them. And Mao and Stalin and Hitler, while they were individual people, they were in many ways assemblages of men too.
Yeah,
and I think that works with the Mule as well. That's why there's a great allusion to the Brown book kind of leeching off of Mao.
Yeah, the Red Book, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so we'll talk about this. The last chapter is kind of the Mule, if it is the Mule, kind of going insane. It plays with the whole lady from Shanghai trope too at the very beginning with its epigraph, and You have a lot of these long sections interspersed. It's almost, it gives a break from the initial action. One thing I will say about all these quotations is that the writing that brackets it is uniformly better than any of the sections themselves. It's quite stark. So that's an artistic comment too, even though it's not directly stated.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the best ways to prop yourself up is to surround yourself with shit. If you're the number 4 hitter in baseball and the number 3 and the number 5 guys are hitting 240, even if you're having an off year, or you're 300 hitter and hitting 270, you look good by comparison.
But did you want to make any comments about the ending of the Mule and any?
You mean the Corridor Gray chapter?
Sorry.
The Corridor Gray chapter.
Yes. And any comments initially about any characters that may have been left out? Because of course it's very difficult to distill any of these books properly without doing a point-by-point review.
Well, I mean, I wanted to have. Here's where I was going for the paranoia. One of the things that I do is, and like in the spy book and also in the sci-fi book, is I like the idea of American paranoia and conspiracy stuff. Here, for example, I dispose of the whole JFK assassination by making it a footnote in the Foundation's rise. I also wanted to have, in UFO lore and whatnot, we have the whole Area 51 and the Roswell incident and aliens doing that, and a secret shadow government, and the Illuminati, and the Freemasons, and the Jewish bankers, the Rothschilds, and the aliens from Beta Reticuli, where the fuck they're supposed to be from. Well, I wanted to have here, and I expand more of this in the spy book. There are things, for example, there's an island called Plum Island off of Long Island, and between Long Island and Rhode Island, where supposedly the government did secret tests on animals, and whenever a dead animal washes up on Long Island or Connecticut shores and looks funny, they think it's some government experiment. So here I wanted to have my own sort of in-book paranoia. And so I came up with the idea. When I was a kid, there was a place called Creedmoor Hospital for the criminally insane. Most people are familiar with Bellevue, where people who do some criminal act are sent for psychiatric evaluation. In shows like Law and Order and whatnot, people always talk about going to Bellevue. But Creedmoor was the place for like the really insane fuckers who were there for years on end, not just for a psychiatric evaluation. And so we ended up. I thought, well, it would be interesting if there was some secret government project underneath one of these hospitals, like the X-Files back in the 60s. I'm playing off the whole One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest kind of thing, where these characters are set up. And it seems that some crazy person who may or may not be the Mule was brought in maybe by Big Frank or whatnot. And so now the Mule has been put under government surveillance. This is also gives into the sort of Batman mythos of Arkham Asylum, where the Joker and all his enemies are. So I'm even though I'm not a big comic book superhero fan, I do, again, the way I use soap opera things, taking comic books here along with films and soap opera. Here we have the super criminal, the Mule, possibly ending up in an insane asylum. We find out he lives another 20 or so years. And we have an interview then with the doctor who gives an idea of, what may have happened to the Mule or whatnot. To the Mule, this Deus Ex Machina was too convenient, but is this sort of thing which also made the science fiction melodrama even the better stories. And I'm quoting from a book, Adam Slade. I forget the name of the book, but the character Adam Slade, which is I mentioned this character Michael Nur that is mentioned by Bit von Reingel in this book. He appears much more in the spy book. He's going to appear in later books. He did a book called Sex Life of the Gods. This Adam Slade story, I forget who wrote it, but it turns out that Adam Slade, in this sci-fi story from the late 50s or 60s, which is in the public domain, Adam Slade was the Adam of the Bible, and Adam Slade was an ancient astronaut that came to Earth and ended up being the Adam that helped populate it and whatnot. So here we have that, and this is going to figure in my sci-fi book where Mule devotees become a cult that end up trying to take over another planet, 1,000, 1,200 years in the future or whatever. So I one of the things I've been doing in a lot of the later books of the last 5 or 6 years is I set up loose ends that I'm going to pick up in other books so that I get this organic universe here. And let me see how this book ends here. This chapter ends with we get Manny Cole interviewing.
Well, you get the ending is very bizarre in the sense that it seems very poor writing. It's all a bunch of almost psychotic ranting.
Yeah.
That is supposedly the Mule talking, but and there is a section here that when you're talking about these loose ends, this is a very effective one because you don't know if this is just another of Mule's rants where he goes, "I am a novelist, and I suppose I create tales even when those tales were seemingly gift wrapped to me, like that of the Foundation's rise and fall in the war with the Mafia." That you could definitely allude to in with Manny Cole, but it also works within the context of the Mule. The Mule does appear in terms of in hearsay, but he never appears in form, and he's a legendary figure in that sense.
I wanted to end with the Mule just ranting and raving. I forget. I think.
He says some kind of almost parable at the end that really makes no given sense.
Well, he's the King of New York. That's a direct reference to the Christopher Walken film and A Fall from Power. I think there was a movie. I think I based this on a movie or a TV show where at the end the character is just ranting in his own mind or whatnot. And off the top of my head, I forget the actual movie that I sort of based it on. But there's also the end scene that I more specifically go to, the end of the movie M with Peter Lorre, where the pedophile is on trial, just like we have the kid who's brought on trial that Paulie shoots in front of the commission. So I wanted to have this idea of this super.
It seems like I recall this long series that Martin Scorsese did where he would take scenes from his movies. I can't recall the title of the series, but he would take scenes from his movies and compare them to influences, and each one his were better.
Yeah.
So M, as good of a film as that is, that whole section is very overdone, and it's probably the weakest section in that film, which could have been a great film, a great early sound film. But yours play far more realistically.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember. But I can't remember what. I'm just seeing some typos here that I'm heading in letters. I can't remember what scene it was. It might have been a riff on one of the Joker things from the Dark Knight film where Heath Ledger just goes crazy. But the Mule, even though the Mule is insane, he's a much more convincing insane. Assuming this is the Mule, he's much more convincing. And even though he's clearly insane, you can see the outlines of his insanity within his ravings. Whereas with the Joker, you don't see that. What. I know there was some film or some book or some character that.
Do you even recall any of the scenes so that I could help you?
No. Off the top, and it's odd that I forgot. But I know that. I mean, the writing is totally mine. But the idea of having someone basically in restraints, just sort of blabbing their minds off. I am. Let me see. I am what they call. They didn't call me. New York is longer than who are you? Who is man? I'm the land. 1948, 37, or 52. And then due to love of Bergman, the Battle of the Bulge. Nothing. Swift Encounter. Yes. I was the King of New York. I was the King of New York. That's not only the film. I was the king. I think this was. I think part of it was the end of the end of White Heat with Jimmy Cagney, where he's I'm on top of the world, Mom. There's parts of there's probably 3 or 4 main things.
Is that the one where he's killed in the end?
Yeah, and the whole petroleum plant.
Yeah, I think that is the one that you're talking about. I was thinking Psycho too, perhaps for some internal cravings.
Psycho. That was also with him being in restraints. The restraints. So yeah, it was Psycho, White Heat. Yeah. Because I was happy. I was for a time. Yeah, and in the end, where Norman Bates is saying, I wouldn't hurt a fly as the fly is on his fingers or whatnot. And he's saying, so yeah, the end of Psycho. That's right. It was Psycho. It was Norman Bates. It was the Joker. I wanted to have the idea of this fallen supervillain, so to speak, still claiming victory.
Would the Mule ever appear in a future work of yours in a more of a
No. The Mule. Like I said, certain characters are delimited. Big Frank will never appear in a major scene again. I mean, I could change my mind, but I doubt it. Paulie is flexible. He can bob in and out. He appears again at the end of the Western novel when the young girl becomes the old woman. Tony Luft has flexibility. He's going to appear in a later book on the demise of the Maravelli crime family. Joey Greco appears in 64. He appears in the spy novel. He's going to appear in that demise novel.
The Grand and the Glorious.
Yeah. Bit von Rheingold, obviously, I can throw Bit in and he can shake his booty on any,
Do you have do you have any inherently good characters in the ethical sense that would make good characters? Because it seems like apart from True Life, your corpus is full of a pantheon of evil bastards.
Well, if you look at my short stories, my whole Ugly Girls are good people who get shat on. A lot of my short stories are that way too. My Western, the Western is filled with mostly good people who get screwed over. The spy book has a lot of good characters. In this book, I mean, I'm dealing with a lot of bad people. There is the hooker with the heart of gold that isn't a cliche that Big Frank is in bed with. We know, we see Big Frank's wife. Dino Vincetti, I would argue, is a basically good character.
Do you think in the sense that it's more difficult to write in second person than it is first or third person, but those forms are more flexible? That is more difficult
second person would be you.
Good characters than inherently bad characters.
Second person would be almost impossible. You'd be having to. Well, you were doing this. It would have to be an omniscient narrator accusing another person. So you can only really do first or third person. Second person, you can write a letter. You left me at the altar. You son of a bitch, you bastard. The woman to the man who jilted her or something. So second person would be awfully difficult to do. I am going to do my sci-fi book in third person because I want to get that Ishmael effect. Because my 2 Elias Walker characters in the first 2 books, the Western hero and the spy anti-hero, are first person accounts. I want to have someone looking at the superhero Elias Walker of the future.